She knelt in the dark with her hands buried in cool, damp earth that smelled of rain and stone. All around her, in the soft glow of battery-powered lanterns, were the pale, pearlescent globes she had coaxed from the rock. They were no bigger than a thumbnail, but there were hundreds of them, a silent city pushing up through the loam she had carried here on her own back. This was the first true flush. It had worked, and outside this protected basin of her own making, the whole world was turning to dust. 6 months earlier, Elara Vance had paid $385,000 for a hole in the ground, and the town of Havenswood agreed she had lost her mind. The auction was a formality, a final nail in the coffin of the old Blackwood quarry. For 50 years, it had given up its granite heart to the state for roads and foundations, and for the last 10 it had sat abandoned, a 200-acre granite scar on a landscape, filling with stagnant water and scrub brush. No one wanted it. The auctioneer, a man named Peters with a voice like gravel in a tin can, barely tried to sell it. He described it as a unique recreational opportunity, with a smirk that told the assembled crowd of farmers and small business owners exactly what he thought of that. "All right, let's get this one over with," he sighed, wiping sweat from his brow. Lot 7, the old Blackwood property. 212 acres, mostly vertical. We'll open the bidding at $100,000 for the land and the tax liability that comes with it. Silence. A cough from the back. A few men shifted their weight, their faces grim with the satisfaction of seeing a dead thing stay dead. A property like that was an anchor. No topsoil, no pasture, no timber worth logging. It was a place you threw old refrigerators, not good money. "Do I hear 100? Peters asked, his gaze sweeping the room with theatrical boredom. More silence. 50,000? Someone give me 50 to get us started. From the side of the room, a man in a crisp linen suit, Mr. Sterling, let out a low chuckle. He was a developer from a city who'd been buying up distressed farms and subdividing them into 5-acre ranchettes for people who wanted the idea of country living without the work. He leaned over to the man next to him and whispered, loud enough for half the room to hear, "They ought to pay someone to take it." The auctioneer's hammer hovered. "Going once. 385,000, Elara said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the humid air of the town hall like a shard of glass. Every head turned. Elara Vance stood near the back, her hands in the pockets of her canvas jacket. She was 32, a woman alone, having come back to Havenswood a year ago after her parents passed, with only the money from the sale of their modest house in the city to her name. She was an outsider by a generation and a mystery. The auctioneer blinked. "I'm sorry, ma'am, did you say 385,000? She repeated, her gaze level. It was all she had, every last cent. A wave of murmurs washed through the room. It was not a gasp of excitement, but of collective, baffled pity. Sterling's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of irritation, as if a fly had landed in his drink. He had likely planned to pick up the quarry for a pittance later, through a back-channel tax auction, once everyone had officially forgotten it. Peters, flustered, looked around. "I have a bid of 385. Do I hear 400? He looked directly at Sterling, who simply gave a slight, dismissive shake of his head. He wasn't going to be drawn into a fool's game. "Going once," Peters said, his voice regaining its rhythm. Going twice, his eyes found Elara's again, a question in them. Was this a joke? Her face was calm, resolute. "Sold," he finally snapped, the gavel cracking down like a gunshot. "To the young lady in the back for $385,000. A strange, heavy silence fell as Elara walked to the front desk to sign the papers. It was the kind of quiet that follows a public accident, a shared moment of witnessing something inexplicable and sad. She didn't look at any of them. She signed her name, handed over the cashier's check, and took the deed. As she walked out of the town hall and into the unforgiving afternoon sun, she could feel their judgment on her back, a physical weight. She had bought a worthless hole. She had paid a fortune for the privilege, and she was in the town's unanimous and unspoken verdict, a fool. The verdict was delivered daily in small, quiet ways. When she went to the Havenswood feed and seed for supplies, the men on the porch would stop talking and watch her pass. At the general store, Martha Gable, who had known Elara's mother, would look at her with such profound pity it felt like a physical pat on the head. Anything else, dear? She'd ask, her tone suggesting Alara might need a warm blanket and a cup of tea. The mockery was never overt, but it was constant, a low hum of disapproval beneath the town's surface. More money than sense, she heard a farmer mutter as she loaded bags of peat moss in her old truck. A woman alone thinks she can make something out of that rock pile. She'll be broke by winter. Alara did not reply. She met their pity and their scorn with a quiet stillness that they mistook for naivete. She simply worked. She rose before the sun, her boots crunching on the gravel drive she'd made herself, and walked the perimeter of her property. The quarry was even more daunting up close. The sheer granite walls dropped 100 feet to a murky, rust-colored pond at the bottom. The floor was a jumble of shattered rock and debris left by the blasting crews a decade ago. There was no soil to speak of, only granite dust and chips. It was a dead place, sterile and silent. Anyone else would have despaired. Alara looked at it and saw shade. She saw thermal mass. She saw walls that held the cool night air long into the day. In the evenings, she sat at her small kitchen table in the old foreman's shack that had come with the property, a single bare bulb buzzing overhead. She did the arithmetic. The deed had taken everything. She had $4,000 left in her checking account. She had her truck, a few tools, and a shack with a leaky roof. The arithmetic of survival was brutal and stark. She figured she had 6 months. 6 months to make the rock speak, or she would lose everything. She refused to despair. She adjusted. Her first visitor was not a friend, but a witness. Mr. Soren was a retired cabinet maker who lived on a small plot of land bordering the quarry. He was a stooped, gentle man in his 80s, with hands as gnarled as oak roots and a thick accent from a country that no longer existed on any map. He had watched the quarry being born, and he had watched it die. He watched Alara now, from his back porch, as she began the impossible task. He saw her spend a week just clearing a safe path to the quarry floor. He saw her haul out rusted cables and rotted tires. Then he saw her start hauling things in. Day after day, her truck rattled down the highway, returning with bedfuls of what the town considered garbage. Spent grain from the brewery an hour north, wood chips from the sawmill, bales of straw and bags of gypsum, coffee grounds she collected from every diner and cafe within a 50-mile radius. She was building soil, spoonful by spoonful. The farmers watched her drive past, her truck piled high with rotting organic matter, and shook their heads. The fool was now a scavenger. One hot afternoon, as she was wrestling a heavy bag of compost down the treacherous path, she saw Mr. Soren standing at the fence line. He held a glass jar of water, condensation beating on its side. He didn't speak, just watched her work, his pale blue eyes missing nothing. Alara paused, wiping sweat from her face with the back of a gritty glove. She was tired, her muscles screaming. "Hard work for a hole in the ground," he said. His voice was soft, without a trace of the town's mockery. It was a simple statement of fact. "It is," Alara agreed, her breath coming in ragged bursts. He held the jar up. "You look thirsty." She walked over, took the jar, and drank. The water was cold and clean, tasting faintly of mint. She drank the whole thing without stopping. "Thank you," she said, handing it back. He nodded, his eyes on the quarry floor, where her neat piles of materials were arranged like a general's battle plan. "They think you're planting rocks," he said. "Let them," Alara said. He was quiet for a long moment. "This place," he said, gesturing with a crooked finger toward the granite walls, "was not always a hole. Before the blasting, it was a north-facing hollow, full of old-growth oak and maple. The ground was always damp, even in August. In spring, the whole forest floor, it was covered in mushrooms. Morels, the size of a child's fist." He looked at her then, a knowing light in his eyes. He was the only one who saw. He was the only one who remembered. "The stone remembers the forest, little bird," Mr. Soren said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You just have to teach it how to speak again." He tapped the side of his head. "The memory is in the rock, in the water that seeps through it. The spores are patient. They wait." That was the first time someone had looked at her work and seen a purpose instead of folly. That single sentence was more valuable than any tool she owned. The stone remembers the forest. It became her mantra. She wasn't creating something from nothing. She was a collaborator, an archaeologist of biology, coaxing a ghost back to life. His words gave her a new reserve of strength. She went back to her work not just with determination, but with a quiet, fierce joy. The labor was still backbreaking, but now it felt like a conversation. She spent the next month mixing her ingredients. She layered the straw and the wood chips and the grain, watering each layer from a hose she'd run down from the shack. She turned the piles with a pitchfork until her shoulders burned and her hands were raw, even through her gloves. The piles began to steam in the cool morning air, the heat of decomposition a living thing. She was making the dark, rich humus that the forest had lost. She was building a memory of soil. The town's amusement curdled into a kind of morbid curiosity. They saw the steam rising from the quarry and traded jokes about her trying to start a volcano. But the jokes were getting thinner. Her sheer, relentless effort was becoming a kind of landmark. People would drive by slowly on the county road, pointing out the lone figure moving dirt in the giant's bowl. She was a curiosity, Havenswood's own resident eccentric. It was during this time that Finn appeared. He was maybe 15, a lanky, restless boy with a shock of sandy hair and the kind of slouch that suggested he was trying to fold himself out of existence. He was one of those kids who orbited the edge of town, too old for childhood games and too young for the world of work. He'd lost his father a few years back, and his mother worked 2 jobs, leaving him with too much time and not enough direction. He started by watching from the trees at the quarry's edge, a silent observer like Mr. Soren, but without the old man's knowing peace. Alara was aware of him for days before she acknowledged him. She'd catch a flicker of movement in the woods, the glint of the sun off his phone screen. She didn't mind. She was used to being watched. One afternoon, she was trying to maneuver a wheelbarrow laden with wet compost over a particularly tricky bit of rock. The wheel caught, and the whole thing tipped, spilling its precious, dark cargo. Alara didn't curse. She just stood there for a moment, catching her breath, and began the slow work of shoveling it all back in. From the trees, a voice. "You need a board for that spot." Alara looked up. Finn was leaning against a pine, chewing on a piece of grass. "Probably do," she said, and went back to shoveling. He watched her for another minute. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all teenage boredom, he emerged from the woods, picked up a sturdy-looking plank from a pile of scrap, and wedged it over the gap. He didn't say another word. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, as Alara successfully navigated the wheelbarrow over the makeshift bridge. "Thanks," she said. He just shrugged and retreated back to his perch in the trees. But the next day he was back, and the day after that. He never offered to help again, not directly. But sometimes she would find a pile of rocks moved from her path, or a tool she'd left behind placed neatly by the entrance. A silent, grudging partnership was forming. By late August, the soil was ready. It was dark, crumbly, and smelled like life. She spent 2 weeks spreading it in long, neat beds across the quarry floor, a patchwork of black against the gray stone. Then came the final, most crucial step. From a small refrigerator in her shack, she retrieved dozens of petri dishes. They were filled with mycelium, the thread-like vegetative part of a fungus. She had spent the last of her savings on these specific, rare cultures, sourced from a specialty lab in Oregon. Stone caps, they were called, a variety known for its symbiotic relationship with granite and limestone. They were notoriously difficult to cultivate, but they tasted, it was said, like roasted nuts and wild earth, and chefs in the city would pay a fortune for them. She worked at night now, under the glow of her lanterns, to protect the delicate spores from the harsh sun. She mixed the mycelium into a slurry with water and molasses, and carefully inoculated her prepared beds and hundreds of oak logs she'd had delivered. It was quiet, meticulous work. She was a doctor tending to a patient, a priestess performing a rite. Finn, who had grown bolder, would sometimes watch from the quarry rim, a small silhouette against the starry sky, mesmerized by the strange, silent ritual below. He had never seen work like this. It wasn't farming. It wasn't construction. It was something else entirely. Something secret. Autumn arrived, painting the hills around Havenswood in strokes of gold and crimson. The air grew crisp. In the quarry, the change of season was more subtle. The stone walls held the memory of summer's heat, creating a pocket of mild, stable climate. Alara covered her beds with a thick layer of straw and waited. The waiting was the hardest part. The work had been a physical battle, a fight against gravity and exhaustion. This was a battle of faith. Her bank account was down to its last few $100s. The arithmetic was screaming at her now. She ate beans and rice, patched the leaky roof with tar she'd scavenged, and waited. Mr. Soren would bring her vegetables from his garden sometimes. A few tomatoes, a zucchini, a handful of green beans. He never asked about her progress. He didn't need to. He would just look at the quiet, waiting beds and nod, a small, encouraging smile on his face. Patience, he told her one afternoon, handing her a warm loaf of bread his wife had baked. The forest does not hurry. The first frost came, dusting the world in a delicate white shimmer. The farmers in the valley rushed to bring in the last of their harvest. Alara's quarry was untouched, the air in its basin a few degrees warmer than the surrounding land. And then, one cold November morning, she saw it. She had gone down into the quarry at dawn, as she always did, a thermos of hot coffee in her hand. The lanterns cast long shadows. She knelt by the first bed, pushing aside the straw mulch. And there they were, tiny, perfect, white pinheads pushing up through the dark soil. Dozens of them, then hundreds. She moved to the next bed, and the next. They were everywhere, a silent, triumphant explosion of life. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. A single, sharp breath of pure, unadulterated joy escaped her lips. She sat back on her heels, the cold of the stone seeping through her jeans, and she laughed. A quiet, shaky laugh of someone who had gambled everything on a ghost story and won. Finn found her there an hour later, still kneeling, just looking. He had finally worked up the courage to come all the way down into the quarry. He saw the mushrooms, and his jaw dropped. It looked like a field of pearls had sprouted overnight. Whoa, was all he could manage. Alara looked up at him, her face lit with a kind of incandescent glow that made her look younger, fiercer. Whoa, she agreed. From that day on, Finn was no longer an observer. He was a partner. He was sworn to secrecy, a vow he took with the solemn gravity only a 15-year-old can muster. He helped her with the harvest, his clumsy teenage hands learning to be gentle, to twist the delicate stems just so, to brush the dirt from their caps with a soft bristled brush. They worked in a comfortable silence, punctuated by Finn's occasional exclamations. He started naming the larger clusters. This one's the beast, he'd announce, holding up a clump of a dozen mushrooms. And this whole patch is the Milky Way. For the first time, Alara felt something other than the grim weight of solitary determination. She felt a flicker of companionship. The work was still hard, but it was no longer lonely. The first harvest yielded nearly 80 pounds. 80 pounds of something no one in Havenswood would even recognize as food. Alara knew she couldn't sell them locally. The questions would start immediately. Sterling would hear about it within a day. Her success was a secret she had to keep banked low, like a coal under ash, until she was ready. She packed 20 pounds of the most perfect specimens into a temperature-controlled cooler. She had done her research. There was a restaurant in the city called the Gilded Plate, run by a notoriously demanding chef named Isabelle Dubois. Chef Dubois was famous for her obsession with unique, locally sourced ingredients. Alara got in her truck, the cooler buckled into the passenger seat like a precious child, and drove the 2 hours to the city. She walked in the back door of the restaurant, into a chaotic world of clanging pans, shouting cooks, and hissing steam. She asked for the chef. A line cook sneered at her. "Chef is busy. You a vendor? Leave a sample." "I'll wait," Alara said, her voice calm amidst the chaos. She waited for 45 minutes, standing by a rack of cooling bread, until a formidable woman with sharp eyes and a flour-dusted apron stormed out of the kitchen. "What is it? I don't have time for this." Alara didn't say a word. She just opened the cooler. Chef Dubois stopped. She stared. She leaned in, her professional scowl melting into pure, unadulterated curiosity. She had never seen anything like them. The mushrooms glowed with a soft, internal luminescence. She picked one up, her practiced fingers assessing its weight, its density. She brought it to her nose and inhaled. Her eyes closed. "My God," she whispered. She broke off a tiny piece and ate it raw. A slow smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a treasure hunter finding a map. "Where did you get these?" she demanded, her voice low and intense. "I grow them," Alaris said simply. "You grow them? These don't grow. Not like this." "They do for me," Alaris said. That day, she walked out with an order for 20 pounds a week at a price that made her hands tremble when she wrote the invoice. The arithmetic in her head began to sing a different song. It was no longer about survival. It was about investment. It was about the future. The weekly trips to the city became a new rhythm. Alara would harvest on Tuesday, drive to the city on Wednesday. With the money, she bought a better truck. She installed a walk-in cooler in an old shed. She bought more spore cultures, different varieties this time. Lion's mane that grew like strange white waterfall from the oak logs, deep blue oyster mushrooms, earthy king trumpets. The quarry floor became a secret, thriving garden of fungi. Finn, paid a proper wage now, found a purpose that grounded him. He learned the Latin names, the specific environmental needs of each species. He was no longer the slouching, aimless boy at the edge of town. He walked with a new confidence. He was a cultivator, a businessman in training. He was part of something no one else understood. The town, of course, noticed the changes. They saw the new truck. They saw Finn working for the crazy quarry woman, and saw that the boy was happier than they'd ever seen him. The overt mockery stopped, replaced by a confused and suspicious silence. Where was the money coming from? What on earth was she doing in that hole? The mystery deepened, and in a small town, a mystery is a kind of low-grade infection. Mr. Sterling noticed, most of all, his plan to snap up the quarry for back taxes had been thwarted, and now the property he dismissed was showing signs of life. He started driving by, his expensive sedan kicking up dust on the county road. His smooth, condescending smile was gone, replaced by a narrow, calculating gaze. He'd stop at the feed and seed and ask casual questions. "See, that Vance woman's got a new truck. Must be doing all right for herself. Any idea what she's farming down there?" No one had an answer, and it infuriated him. The unknown variable in his tidy map of the county's wealth was a woman with a hole in the ground, and he couldn't stand it. His envy was a cold, sharp thing, far more dangerous than the town's simple-minded scorn. As spring turned to a hot, dry summer, a new kind of quiet fell over the valley. The sky remained a relentless, pale blue. The rains didn't come. The creeks dwindled to trickles. The farmers started to worry, their usual grumbling taking on a sharper, more fearful edge. Mr. Soren, reading the sky with his old country eyes, shook his head. "The air is sick," he told Alara, looking at the hazy horizon. "Too much heat, no water to wash it clean. Bad things grow in sick air." He was right. In late July it started, a strange, pale fuzz on the leaves of a potato crop on the west side of the valley. The farmer thought nothing of it at first. Then the plants began to yellow and wilt, the potatoes turning to a soft, foul-smelling mush in the ground. It was a blight, a virulent strain of fusarium that thrived in the heat and drought. It spread through the dry, stressed fields like fire. Within 3 weeks, it had crossed the valley. The blight was indiscriminate and merciless. It hit the potatoes, the tomatoes, the squash. Corn stalks grew stunted and produced no ears. The valley's entire agricultural economy, built on a handful of traditional crops, was collapsing. The farmers who had laughed at Alara's rock pile now stood in their own fields of rot and despair, the smell of decay hanging heavy in the air. Alara's quarry, however, was an island, an ark. Its shaded, insulated ecosystem was immune to the blight that ravaged the sun-scorched fields outside. The water she used was from the deep, spring-fed quarry pond, untouched by the surface-level pathogens. While the valley's harvest failed, her own harvest was booming. Basket after basket of perfect, otherworldly mushrooms came up from the dark, rich soil she had made. The fortune inversion was absolute. The thing everyone had called worthless was now the only source of fresh, healthy produce for 100 miles. And everyone knew it. The secret was out. The day the town's fear finally crested, Mr. Sterling made his move. He drove his pristine sedan down Alara's gravel drive and parked it like an invading tank. He found her by the walk-in cooler, supervising Finn as they loaded crates for the weekly city run. "Alara," he said, his voice oozing a false warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "A terrible business, this blight. Just terrible. I've been thinking about you. A woman all alone out here, with this sudden windfall. It must be overwhelming." Alara just looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm managing." Of course, he said, waving a dismissive hand. "But you can't feed a whole town with a few mushrooms. The logistics, the distribution, it's a burden. I want to help." He leaned against the cooler, a conspiratorial smile playing on his lips. "I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer. I'll take this whole operation off your hands. $500,000. Cash. You walk away with a handsome profit, and I'll handle the burden of feeding the community." It was a predator's offer, dressed in the language of concern. He was offering her a fraction of what the quarry was now worth, trying to prey on her perceived weakness. She had paid $385,000 for the land alone. "No, thank you, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice even. "I'm not selling." His smile tightened. "Don't be sentimental. This is a business opportunity, a one-time event. You should capitalize on it. I know what your weekly yield is, and I know what Du Bois is paying you. My offer is more than fair." And there it was. The slip. How did you know the count? Alara's eyes narrowed slightly. He'd had someone watching her, counting the crates, poisoning the well of her success with his envy. "The answer is no," she said again, turning back to her work. Sterling's mask of civility dropped. His face went hard. "You need to be realistic," he hissed. "You're one person. The town is on the verge of panic. If you're seen to be hoarding a resource, things could get ugly. The town council listens to me. There are health codes, zoning regulations. It would be a shame if your little project here was shut down over a technicality." It was a threat, cold and clear. Before Alara could respond, a truck rattled up the drive. It was Dale Harper, a potato farmer whose land bordered the highway. His face was a mask of exhaustion and despair. He got out of his truck and stood there, his hat in his hands, not looking at Sterling. He looked only at Alara. "Ma'am," he started, his voice cracking. I ain't here to ask for a handout. My wife, we ain't got much left. I heard you were growing things." He couldn't bring himself to say more. The shame of a farmer asking for food was too great. Alara looked from the broken farmer to the venomous developer. Here was the test: greed or generosity, exploitation or community. She walked past Sterling, went into the cooler, and came back with a heavy crate of stone caps and lion's mane. She placed it in the bed of Dale's truck. "This should last you a while," she said gently. "There's no charge." Dale stared at her, then at the crate, his eyes filling with tears. I can't." "Yes, you can," Alara said. "Go home and feed your family." She turned and looked at Sterling. His face was a thundercloud of fury. He had been outmaneuvered by a simple act of kindness. He got in his car, spun his wheels at her gravel, and sped away. But Alara knew it wasn't over. Sterling was true to his word. He called an emergency town meeting at the hall that evening. He didn't frame it as a zoning issue. He was smarter than that. He framed it as a matter of public good. The whole town was there, their faces tight with anxiety. The shelves at the general store were nearly bare. The threat of a long, hungry winter was real. He stood at the front of the room, a portrait of civic concern. He spoke of the crisis, of the town's proud history of pulling together. Then he turned his attention to the quarry. He didn't name Alara at first. He spoke of outside interests and windfall profits. He painted a picture of a single individual hoarding a vital resource while the community suffered. "We have a natural bounty right here in our valley," he declared, his voice ringing with false righteousness. "A bounty that could see us through this crisis, but is being siphoned off to fancy restaurants in the city, while our own people go without. Is that right? Is that the Havenswood way?" A murmur of agreement went through the crowd. He was good. He was twisting her success into a crime. He was turning her into the enemy. "I have proposed a solution," Sterling continued, moving in for the kill. "A plan where the town, under the guidance of a community board which I would be happy to lead, would manage the quarry's output, ensuring a fair and equitable distribution for everyone." He was proposing a hostile takeover, cloaked in the language of socialism. He was about to call for a vote, to steamroll the town into seizing her land, when a voice came from the back. "That's not how it is." It was Dale Harper. He stood up, his face still etched with worry, but his voice was steady. "That's not the truth. I went to her place today. My crop's gone. I had nothing. She didn't ask for money. She filled my truck. She told me to go feed my family." A ripple of surprise went through the room. Then another voice, Martha Gable from the general store. "She came to me this morning, sold me 3 crates at a price I could afford, told me to make sure the old folks got some first. We're making soup tomorrow for anyone who needs it." Suddenly, the narrative Sterling had so carefully constructed began to crumble. One by one, others spoke up. The mechanic Alara had paid fairly to fix her truck. The waitress from the diner where she collected coffee grounds, who Alara had given a small bag of mushrooms to, just because. Then the back doors of the hall opened, and Chef Isabel Du Bois walked in, still in her city clothes. "Excuse me," she said, her voice commanding attention. "I heard there was some trouble. Let me be clear. The woman you're talking about is not a hoarder. She's an artist. She's a scientist. And she has single-handedly created a product that has the culinary world buzzing. The prices I pay her are high, yes, because what she grows is worth it. But I also know for a fact that she has turned down higher offers from my competitors because she felt a loyalty to me. She is not a profiteer." The town was silent, looking from Sterling to Alara, who had been standing quietly at the side of the room the entire time. Finally, she stepped forward. She didn't look at Sterling. She looked at the faces of her neighbors. "Mr. Sterling is right about one thing," she said, her voice clear and calm. "We are a community, and we are in trouble." She held up a piece of paper. "This is my harvest schedule for the next 3 months. This is my price list. The first price is what I charge the restaurants in the city. The second price is for Havenswood. It's a third of the city price. It's enough to cover my costs and pay my employee." She looked at Finn, who stood beside her, looking prouder than he ever had in his life. "For anyone who cannot pay, we will barter. Labor, firewood, preserved goods from last year. We will figure it out. No one will go hungry." The room was utterly still. She had not argued. She had not defended herself. She had simply offered a solution, a generous, practical, and fair one. She had chosen community over profit, generosity over greed. In that moment, the town's perception reversed completely. They saw not an eccentric, not a fool, not a profiteer, but a leader. They saw a woman who had seen value where they had seen waste, who had worked while they had mocked, and who now, in her moment of triumph, was offering them a hand instead of a bill. Sterling stood there, his face pale, his plan in ashes. He had been exposed, outwitted not by clever arguments, but by simple, undeniable decency. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the hall, the silence of the town his final, damning verdict. The winter was hard, but no one in Havenswood went hungry. The quarry became the heart of the town, its strange, beautiful, bounteous source of both sustenance and wonder. Alara's business thrived, but it was a different kind of success now, woven into the fabric of the community that had once scorned her. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Alara stood with Mr. Soren and Finn at the quarry's rim, looking down at the warm glow of the lanterns that illuminated the bustling mushroom farm below. It was a city of light and life in the heart of a granite scar. "You see," Mr. Soren said, his hand on her shoulder. "The stone remembers the forest. You just taught the whole town how to listen." Alara looked at the thriving world she had built, at the boy who had found his purpose, at the old man who had kept her faith alive. She had come here alone, with nothing but a wild hope and the scorn of a town. Now, she was home, and she was not alone at all.